that way.
Okay.
Vinay, are you still there? Did we lose you? Minashki? Is Vinay there?
Vinay is there. Yeah, it's becoming on and off. It looks like we lost him for a minute.
Yes, it does appear as if we lost him.
No, Marc, we will give Vinay another 1 minute. Yeah, it's becoming on and off. It looks like we lost him for a minute.
I'm now getting an echo effect too. I'm not sure what that is. Oh, that's too bad.
Well, while we are waiting for him, should we just quickly talk about the topics, Marc, that you'll be teaching during the
Sure.
I think we are back.
So,
I don't know why it went off.
well, you're with us now. You're with us now again.
Yeah. Okay. So my first question is, what prompted you to get into astrology, and when did it happen?
Well, it happened at quite a young age. You know, when I graduated from college in 1973, the first thing I did is I joined a 2-year program that was described as a yoga seminary program. I'd met a spiritual guru in the Kriya Yoga lineage named Swami Kriyananda, who practiced Western astrology. And, you know, it's funny, I can remember thinking that anybody who believed in astrology was either ignorant or uneducated, right? That was my attitude towards astrology when I first met this man. But then I had the experience of him, you know, consulting with me about my birth chart, Western astrology. And I was quite surprised when he told me that he thought I would get involved in doing astrology professionally, which turned out to be correct. And so for 20 years, I was deeply involved in Western astrology. I gave more of what you might be called a psychological consultation. You know, people would come in and I would talk to them about what their chart reflected in terms of personality, proclivities, and tendencies, and stayed away a little bit from the predictive side. Of course, Western astrology does not have as many tools as Jyotish does for the predictive side. But then when K.N. Rao was brought as the second guest speaker at the International Symposium in November of 1993 by David Frawley in Northern California, I met K.N. Rao and just had an incredible experience with him being able to walk me through my life.
I was one of the persons
yes,
who saw him off in Delhi on the day he departed for USA.
I'm not surprised. And so, and then the next day, he was teaching a workshop in how to time the birth of children. He had just come out with his book, Planets and Children. So I took this workshop, and as fate would have it, when I came back to where I lived, San Diego area, somebody got word of the fact that I had done this, and I got contacted by a woman who was having trouble conceiving and having a child and wanted to know if I could predict this. I told her I was a pure beginner, but I would apply the techniques to her chart. Long story short, I was able to predict when she would have a child, and this was my first prediction with Jyotish. And at that point, I just got completely immersed in it, so enamored of the predictive techniques, the yogas of Jyotish, and then dashas of Jyotish. And then, as you know, K.N. Rao had something of a speciality in Jaimini and the Jaimini techniques. And so I myself got, you know, very, very interested in Jaimini. It's become something of a speciality for me. But, you know, I've been involved with astrology since age 22. I'm now just turned age 70. So, and I'm sure this is not the first lifetime, right?
Yeah, so it seems so. When you start astrology that early, it means there must have been a pull in that direction, and that the force for that must have come from previous lives. Surely.
No question.
In fact, I was looking at your website, And it struck me that you've been in Jyotish for nearly, when you started Jyotish, you were 40 years. And so was I when I joined Jyotish.
Really?
Interesting. My background in Jyotish was not from Western astrology, but I was deeply into palmistry at that time. And that led me to study astrology. And the school that was being run by Ken Raoji, that's where I began.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Marc, so now that you have long time backgrounds in both Western as well as Jyotish, in your present practice, which one do you use, or do you still use both, or which one do you prefer, and why?
Well, I practice almost exclusively Jyotish. Just because, it's just so much more sophisticated form of astrology with so much more predictive power. I'm not knocking Western astrology. Western astrology, you can do a lot with Western astrology. I was able, I think, to do a lot with Western astrology, and it has its efficacy. But, I think I've used the analogy that when I went from Western astrology to Jyotish, it was like going from a typewriter to do word processing to a computer. It was just an enormous advance. There's nothing like, what makes Jyotish so unique in its predictive power is its yogas and its dashas. And of course, Western astrology doesn't have anything like that. And I'm not saying you can't predict with Western astrology, you certainly can, but with Jyotish, it's just with its vargas, its divisional charts, and just this ocean of techniques that it has for looking at a chart in so many different ways and so many predictive techniques. It's just, I think, the most sophisticated form of astrology that's ever come into being. And I practice that. I teach it, I write about it, and I practice it almost exclusively. I can't remember the last time I looked at a Western chart. So that should answer your question.
Does it mean that in all aspects of astrological readings, the Jyotish is better, superior than the Western, or Western is in some cases, in certain ways, has more accuracy than the Jyotish?
Well, it's an interesting question. I suppose, because I did so much, what I call astro-psychologizing, that was my background. I got a master's degree in counseling psychology. And so I was really interested in understanding a person's, you might say, personality and psychological dynamics, their psychology, based on the Western chart. And as I mentioned, that was kind of more the type of consultation that I did. I did so much of that for 20 years. So when I got involved in Jyotish, what really fascinated me was the being able to see events, to be able to predict events. So, and I have not gone into that aspect that much in Jyotish. That is, looking at the chart in terms of doing psychological profiling using the Jyotish chart, right? And so if I still wanted to do more of the astro-psychologizing, I'd probably be better at that using the Western chart just because I was more practiced at it. And that's what I did when I was a Western astrologer versus, although my students have really been encouraging me to do a course on Jyotish on psychological profiling with the chart, which of course can be done just as well with the Jyotish system as it could be done in the Western system. I would just be more practiced at it because I did so much of it. If that, is the way I could answer that question.
In fact, that reminds me of quite a few astrologers who shifted from Western to Vedic. And when they do Vedic now, they still have some reminiscences from the Western, and they so easily get back into the transits and the squares and the trines and all that. Sure. And so many of them do that. It's like it's hard to forget your first love. So their first love was Western astrology, and they continue, immersing in it time and again.
Actually, I would say that I abandoned my first love and fell in love with my second love, because it's I practice what you might call, in many respects, pure classical Jyotish. Pure classical Jyotish, as K.N. Rao taught it, but with, being innovative and seeing the ways he used to talk about it, that combinations given in the ancient texts have to be seen in the light of the modern context and can have new meanings, right? But, otherwise, if you were students who take my courses know that I practice and I teach pure classical Jyotish.
Good, great. Anyone else in your close family who's infected with the same virus?
It is kind of an obsession, right? Actually, I'm a complete black sheep. I was raised in Catholicism, went to Catholic schools, Catholic grade school, was taught by nuns and priests. And, I was kind of raised to be a professional person. I once thought I was going to become a lawyer. All my siblings are in professional positions and so forth, very conventional, mainstream professions. If someone would have told me back when I was in high school that I was going to become a Jyotishi and deeply steeped in the Veda Vidya, I would have just thought that was just impossible. But that's what happened. And so I'm quite an anomaly within my family system. And amongst all my nieces and nephews, I'm known as the eccentric Uncle Marc, who's into these strange things called yoga and Ayurveda and Jyotish. But they all come to me for predictions at the same time.
Yeah. That reminds me, while there are so many commonalities between you and me, this is where we probably differ, because many people in my family started learning Jyotish once I had started. My first companion was my mother-in-law, who became my class fellow. Yeah, that wasn't very romantic though. But then after that, a lot of people, my sister, my sister-in-law, my mother-in-law's sisters and nieces, etc., etc. So now when our larger family gets together, we talk about nothing but astrology.
Well, that must
and
be
more
fun.
and more people are getting drawn to astrology.
Well, but of course, in your case, it's part of the culture, right? In my case,
yeah, but not really so much. And you're right, here also there are a lot of people, in fact, most people, statistically speaking, who would say that astrology is for nuts. In fact, I met an old friend after very many years, and he asked me, what are you doing? I said, astrology. And he said, astrology, I don't believe in it. I said, you would be as much a fool if you believed it, because you don't know anything about astrology, neither this way nor that way. Right. So that is the situation for most of the educated people.
I understand.
Yeah, even in India, though wherever it is practiced, there is some scope for having resonance with their daily lives and the nakshatras and the tithis, etc., etc.
Sure.
So. What are the outstanding features of your own horoscope which led you to Vedic astrology, if that is not confidential?
No, I've been pretty open about sharing my chart. I refer to it as my horoscope, not my horoscope, my horoscope. That's my joke. Well, just like every chart, it's got some good features. It's got some not so good features. I have a Virgo Lagna. And so for Virgo, Venus is the second and the ninth lord. I'm blessed to have the ninth lord in the ninth house. And as a result of that, I had just a wonderful father. You couldn't have asked for a better father. And I've always had great teachers such as K.N. Rao, but also my spiritual gurus, Maharishi Mahesh Yoga, Baba Haridas.
And K.N. Rao has his ascendant as Libra.
As his ascendant as Libra.
So that also fits in with you.
But I like to joke also that the tragedy of my life is that I was born in the Venus period and moved out of it for 6 months. Had I got that dasha at a different time of life, it would have been a good one. And I have a strong Jupiter. Jupiter's in Pisces in the 7th house. And thank God for Jupiter in Pisces and Venus in Taurus, because my Lagna Lord, Mercury, goes to the 8th, which of course can be good for astrology. It goes to the eighth with the eighth lord, which can be something of an Arishta yoga, but having the natural benefics hemming it like that, it's been very attenuated, been very modified. I only have one not so significant Raja yoga in the chart. Saturn is the fifth lord in the first in a mutual glance with Jupiter in the seventh. Saturn has some strength in the Navamsha because it's in its sign Aquarius. But I'd like to say something about that combination because, I emphasize with my students that if you don't see yogas and you don't see all the yogas in the chart, you'll miss a significant thing of what a person's life has been all about. So in my chart, the fact that Jupiter is in an angle in its own sign, Saturn is in an angle, and it's getting strength in Navamsha, and the fact that Saturn's also the fifth lord produces something, as you probably know, called Virinchi yoga. Virinchi yoga, it's defined by when Jupiter, Saturn, and the fifth lord are all in angles or trines and have sources of strength. And it can really incline oneself towards the study of higher knowledge, Veda and Vedanga. Of course, Jupiter is a Vedanga. So I ran 16 years of Jupiter followed by 19 years of Saturn. And if you didn't see that, this is involved in this Virinchi yoga, you'd not understand what has been the main theme of my life, which has been, Veda Vidya, including Jyotish. So this is what I mean, it's so important to understand the yogas in a chart and see their activation in the dasha sequence to understand what a person's life trends are going to be. You know this, I'm just, explaining how it applies to my chart. So I would say my Virinchi yoga in my chart is one of the more significant features. I predicted in my Saturn major period that I'd have a lot of foreign students. And the reason I said, because obviously Saturn is the fifth lord. This can give you students, it can give you children, but at my time of life, it was going to give me students, not children. But it's in the nakshatra of the sun, which of course is the 12th lord. And I use this principle quite a bit to see the major period, see who the nakshatra lord is, and what that may tell you about some of what that period can also bring. Of course, for anyone with Virgo, the sun is the 12th lord. So I had predicted to a class once before I moved into my Saturn period that because of this combination, I was going to have a lot of students in my Saturn period, and a lot of them were going to be foreign. And the fact is, not most of them, a good portion of my students are foreign. I've been to Russia twice a year, every year since 2013 until COVID hit. And again, if you would have told me when I was in college that I was going to be going to Russia teaching an astrology from India, I would have thought that was preposterous. But that's karma, right? That's karma.
In fact, I was consulting a Nadi reader, and he predicted the same thing for me, that I would have a lot of foreign students and they will take my work forward. So that seems to be happening for the last 20 years. In fact, probably I'm better known outside India than in India.
Well, you mentioned the Nadi reading. When I went to stay in K.N. Rao, this is when you gave me a ride in your car. This was in November 1996. He took me to that Brigu reader in Rajasthan, right? And,
same person. In
same person.
Yeah.
And that person told me that I was going to start a school of astrology, that I was going to have many international tours, that I was going to author all these books. And he predicted this. This was back in 1996. It really didn't start happening until 2016 when I left corporate life and started devoting myself full time to Jyotish. But the predictions came out exactly as he said.
Same here. So nothing that he told me has gone wrong, but we don't know the basis on which he works.
I've always been fascinated what was the basis of what he was saying. I've never quite understood that, but it turned out to be quite accurate. And I want to say that the Arsha Vidya Gurukulam has a special place in my heart because, first of all, in June of 1995, K.N. Rao was teaching there. That was my first time that I went there. He had brought with him this man, Yogi Karve, and I had the experience of him being able to cognize my exact birth data, including the exact time on my birth certificate. And I also met there a woman who was to be very significant in my life here for the last 26 years. And Karve ji predicted that relationship. he told me that a relationship was going to come into my life in December of 1995. Because he was telling me this in June, and right on December 1 is when this woman, came into my life and a relationship began. That's now existed for 26 years. So it was quite a remarkable experience. And then I started teaching at the Ashby Group here the last few years. In fact, I just did a program in September there, an advanced Germany program. Just this last September, I was there. And I love the place. It's just such a wonderful atmosphere. I can't think of a better atmosphere for teaching Jyotish or any other Veda Vidya. You know this because you've been going there for years now. And so I was really delighted to be invited to participate in the Jyotish Kumbh Mela. Vinay, I understand that you were instrumental in making that happen. So I want to thank you personally for that as well.
Yeah, but you've been holding classes in the Ashby Group.
I have been, yes.
Just as Penny does.
Yes. In fact, it was Penny. It was Penny who invited me to teach a group of her senior students, teach them Jaimini, because that's not something heretofore her teacher taught. It's not something she taught. So she brought me, and this is where I met people like Nilima, who I know you know. I met Nilima because she was part of. And we've become good friends. So yes, I've been teaching since, I guess that was 2016. I started teaching there once a year until, of course, COVID happened. But then just this last year again. And my intention is to continue to teach there, regularly, at least once a year, and hopefully now part of the Jyotish Kumbh Mela as well.
Good. Can I ask you something about your publications and your writings? I understand you've written 22 books and more than 50 articles here and there. So what are you writing these days?
Well, I started this thing in 2016 that I called the Jyotish Journal, in which people sign up, they get a subscription, they get an article every month. And so I've been writing an article every month ever since then. It's the total of articles is now up to 70 articles, actually. And these are all on Amazon.com. My latest article was on the close timing of close timing of childbirth, where I was showing by using both Jaimini techniques and Parashari techniques, you can time the birth of the child within a 3-day period. And actually in that article, I predicted that a child would be born on either the 22nd of September or the 21st of September to a Russian student of mine. And it turns out the child was born on the 21st. So I'm showing the application of these techniques and then made a prediction at the end of the article that came out. The credit all goes to K.N. Rao. Most everything I've learned, I learned from him. I like to say my Jyotish is a pale imitation of K.N. Rao's. K.N. Rao's pale imitation of K.N. Rao, though, makes a strong impression. And so each month I write an article, and then I collect those articles into books. So 22 of those books are 11 collections of those articles, but then I have a lot of different books on separate topics. She showed some of the titles. I've written 2 books on Jaimini, The Essentials of Jaimini, Jewels of Jaimini. I wrote a book called Seekers of the Shamsha. I did a commentary, original translation and commentary on the Law Group Parashari. I just published a book called Studies in Medical Astrology. What else? Oh, there's a book about predicting major life events, where I'm showing K.N. Rao's approach of using the composite technique of combining Jaimini with Parashari to improve predictive accuracy. So these are all on Amazon.com, either in a e-format, Kindle format, and or print format. I wanted to create a legacy of Vinay, kind of following in K.N. Rao's footsteps, where I wanted to sort of carry on the tradition and have it be something that I left behind in the world. This is why I've really focused on being so much an author. I actually stopped consulting because it was kind of consuming all my time. Stopped in 2016 and became more of what I call an academic Jyotishi, where I researched, I wrote, and I taught. I still give predictions to people, but I'm not consulting for the general public anymore.
Okay. You're following the system of Jaimini that K.N. Rao has taught you, because he is in many ways different from the classics.
as I said, my Jyotish is a pale imitation of K and Rao's. So the Jaimini.
So if he has any limitations, then he has passed on to you also.
That's true. Now, I've studied the Jaimini text in the original. In fact, I've done an original translation of all 4 parts of the first chapter, and have published those in my books, The Essentials of Jaimini and then The Jewels of Jaimini, and written a commentary on those with illustrations. So I'm not going to say that I have exclusively learned Jaimini from K and Rao. You know, I like to tell my students, Vinay, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, that Jyotish teaches you Jyotish. If you work on charts and you want to see them in relationship to a person's life events and how those events are coming off in the two different systems, it teaches you about that, right? So, you know, if you don't mind, I'll tell a quick little story. When I was with K and Rao in India and we had traveled to see the Brigu reader, it was just him and I, and we were having dinner one night. And I expressed at that time my ambition to become a good predictor like him. And I asked him what he recommended. And what he told me was that, he said, Marc, for over a 10-year period, work on thousands of charts in which you're noting the correlation between the events that happen in a person's life and the astrological factors. And he said, and after that, you'll be a good predictor. Well, you know, that was a little intimidating, right? 10 years, thousands of charts. But you know, when I did that, and I still can't predict like him, but it did teach me how to predict, and I've had good predictive success, particularly with a certain set of questions that are typically asked in a Jyotish consultation. And that was my book, Predicting Major Life Events. There's 8 events there, things like career rise, childbirth, purchase of property, marriage, spiritual initiation, good financial periods. These are the kind of things that people ask about over and over again. And these are the things that I've concentrated on. And, you know, Jyotish will teach you Jyotish if you work on charts. And that's was his recommendation. And that's my recommendation to students.
Yeah, of course. In fact, any art, any science, unless you practice it, it doesn't lead you anywhere. Practice is the key thing. In fact, in Jyotish, I find that even if you have a wrongest principle in your mind, and if you want to prove it to be right, you can show a few charts and prove the principle which is absolutely rubbish. So that is the art of, you know, how to stay away from that rubbish.
Right, exactly.
So that is why classics are so important, because in the modern times, there are youngsters who are coming out with a lot of different interpretations of the originals, and they're experimenting. Well, it's good to experiment, but one should not lose touch of the classics.
Not at all.
That is an essential thing.
Those principles are timeless.
Yes. In fact, I am reminded of a person who, an American white person, who came to my house in Delhi, maybe 20 years back or so. He was also a Catholic priest to begin with. He was well versed with Western astrology, and he has made forays into Vedic also. So I asked him the standard question, which I asked you also, that which one do you use in your practice? He gave me a very interesting answer. And that answer should be instructive for a lot of our students. He said that if there is a new customer, I ask him 3 questions. And based on the answers to those 3 questions, I decide which system to use, Western or the Vedic.
I see.
Yeah. And I said, and what are those questions? He told me those questions, which of course I have forgotten. What were they? Because the crux of the matter was in those questions. But what I still remember is that he wanted to gauge the spiritual content of this person's mind. If he was even slightly inclined towards spirituality, he would use the Vedic chart. And if it was not so, then he would use the Western chart. I told him, but everyone is spiritual, at least to some extent. He said, no, you don't know Americans. And that was the time when I had not started coming to US. So I was wondering if that is true, that there is not an iota of spirituality in many of the young people there. Is that true?
Well, Vinay, what I like to say is that we all have spirituality because we all have the spirit within. Now, others may be awakened to it more than others and express it more, but all of us have that, we're all spirit in essence. And so there's spirituality in all of us. Some people obviously are born and then live a life where that becomes the primary value in life, pursuit of spiritual goals. Other people, not at all. So there's awakened spirituality, and then there's what I would call dormant spirituality. I don't really see how either the Western chart or the Vedic chart, why you would use one as being more just related to the mundane and the other more to spiritual life. I'd be interested to have that conversation with him about how he made that differentiation.
I think what he was doing was that he was again stressing more on the sun sign, like they do in Western. And in Vedic, you give more importance to the moon sign. So, yeah, and sun being, and the zodiacs are different. There's a significant difference. When you call Virgo, the Western Virgo is very different from the Vedic Virgo. So how it can be the same? Because when you study the books, the characteristics of Virgo are the same in both the systems. Yet they refer to different parts of the arc of the zodiac.
What I found about that, because this was a real conflict for me when, having been a Western astrologer for 20 years, now I'm using the sidereal zodiac, all the planetary placements are different. How can they both be true? Or how can them both be valid? This is defies logic. What I discovered is that the same things show up in different ways. I'll use my own chart as an example. In the Western system, I have a lot of Virgo characteristics. When you describe Virgo and what's given in both Western and Vedic astrology as characteristics of being analytical and detail oriented and all these sorts of things. In the Western system, I was a Virgo moon. In the Vedic system, my Lagna is Virgo. So, the same thing is showing up just in a different way. Of course, there's only one person with one personality, with one karma, and that's going to get reflected. If a system of astrology is valid, it's got to be reflected accurately, right?
That's quite true. That's quite true. What are you going to teach this time in the Jyotish Kumbh? Because many of the students want to know a little more than the title of your subject.
Sure. Well, as I told you, I just fell in love with the Jaimini system, and it's become something of a speciality. And when the first class I ever taught online was the Jaimini class, and the first book I ever wrote was The Essentials of Jaimini. I love this system. I love teaching this system. It's not as commonly known or used, and therefore I find, students who have not been exposed to it before maybe have an interest. So my presentations are going to be on Jaimini, and the first one is going to be, as everyone probably knows, at least listening to this, in Jaimini we have these special karakas based on degrees, right? And then the dashas are not planetary periods.
Do you use 7 karakas or 8 karakas?
Well, I'm a student of Can Rouse, so that should tell you that I use 7 karakas only, right? 7 karakas only. And I correlate those with the first 7 houses, roughly anyway, with the first 7 houses of the horoscope.
But do you have an answer to those who want to include Rahu in it?
Well,
as 8 karakas.
Well, I've studied all the arguments about them. I've seen what's, in Parashara Hora. And, we can, this is a controversy and we can argue with the death. I'm just saying that I found 7 karaka system to be the one that has worked for me and is what's given me predictive success. That's all I can say. All right. So, everyone has to make a choice.
There is no argument that clinches it either on this side or that side.
Well, there is in my mind, because Well, the confusion comes in is that in that chapter where he's giving the Karakas, Sage Jaimini uses the word va, 7 or 8, va. This is what creates all the confusion, right? That word va, which means or.
Which means the controversy existed at the time of Parashara.
That could be. Now, what he then utilized himself and advocated, of course, it's anybody's guess. I'm interested in what works. And what always impressed me about what I learned from K and Rao
But the trouble is that people who believe in Rahu, they say their system works.
Yes, I know. And my answer to that is that God bless them. Let them use their system and let them predict with that. I'm going to use my 7 karakas and I'm going to predict with that. And I'll show you how I do that. So coming back to my topic, I entitled it Elegant Simplicity, because what I love about the Jaimini system is the way in which oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes events can come out in a very simple, straightforward way. And let me just give you an example of that using my own chart. I live in a beautiful area of Southern California near the ocean. It's called Cardiff by the Sea. I'm very blessed to be in this kind of environment. But for a long time, the idea of buying a house here was out of reach for me because the property values are astronomical. Okay, but then I saw that I was going to be moving into my Taurus period. And Taurus has Venus, but the Karaka it is the MK, the planet with the 4th highest degrees, which is like all the significations in the way I teach Jaimini, carries all the significations of the 4th house, including home and property. So I saw I was moving into this period in 2004. And so I thought to myself, wow, this would be a period when maybe I could finally buy a home. And I won't, go into all the details.
And your 4th lord is in a watery sign, Jupiter, in Pisces.
Near the ocean.
Yeah.
So, and so not only that, it's the 9th house. So long story short, I was finally getting in a position where I was able to buy this lovely home that I'm now in. But I decided I wanted to build a temple in the back. And it's not just the MK in Taurus, Venus has its own sign, but it's in the 9th house, which of course rules temples. And then I'll tell you a K and Rao story. He had predicted a long time ago that I would be involved in temple building. At the time, I couldn't imagine what that would mean, right? Couldn't imagine what that would mean. And I forgot about the prediction. But then, I remembered it when I built this temple in the back of my house. So I wrote to him, told him about this. He writes back, and you've installed 3 deities, which was absolutely correct. How he knew that, I have no idea. But this is what he said, and he was absolutely correct. So what I'm trying to say is that when I say elegant simplicity, sometimes it can be as simple as that you run a sign containing one of these karakas, and it indicates clearly that an event related to the meanings of that karaka can take place. For example, if you're running the sign containing the DK, planet with the fewest degrees, Dara karaka, indicator of spouse, this can indicate a time when a person marries. If they're running a sign containing the PK, planet with the 5th highest degrees, like unto the meanings of the 5th house, such as children, you can have children. And I have example after example about predictions I made based on this kind of very simple, elegant principle. The AMK, which in the Jaimini system, planet with the 2nd highest degrees, as you know, can be something of a career significator, that when you run the period containing the AMK, this can be a time when you can experience professional rise. It was absolutely true for me. And I can show innumerable examples of where it's been true for others. Now, it can get much more complicated than that. I'm not saying it always comes out that simply, but very often it does. And this is, you're not doing all this complex analysis. You're not using divisional charts. You're just looking at 2 factors. A person's running this sign, it contains this karaka, and then events related to the karaka's meaning come out. That's elegant simplicity. And this is what I'm going to be teaching about in my first presentation. The second presentation, as you know, there are special Jaimini lagnas that are used, chief among those being Karakamsha lagna, right? Determined by seeing the planet with the highest degrees, the Atmakaraka, its placement by sign in the Vamsha, and then using that as a lagna, both back in the birth chart, but also in the Vamsha itself. Call it Karakamsha in the birth chart, called Swamsha in the Vamsha, as K and Rao does. Well, there are 124 sutras in the second pada of the first chapter of the Jaimini Sutras that are devoted to the effects of planets from Karakamsha Lagna. And there are very interesting sutras that when they appear in a person's chart, these combinations, I've found them to be exceedingly valid and very true. Again, I'll use my own chart as an example. My Karakamsha Lagna is Scorpio. And from Scorpio, Jupiter is the fifth lord in the fifth house. Well, there's Jaimini Sutras that says when this is the case, a man will study Veda and Vedanga, and the man will author, right? Both of which, of course, has been very, very true for me. So what I'm going to be going into in this second presentation is I'm not going to have time to look at all of them, but I select a number of sutras about the effects of planets of Karakamsha Lagna and show illustrations both in terms of the charts of famous people and how these combinations can be seen to have played themselves out, or also just from predictions I've made. Take the chart, I'm not a Trump fan at all, okay, Donald Trump fan, but you look at his chart, and one of the sutras says that when Mercury falls in the 10th house from Karakamsha Lagna with the additional aspect of a benefic, a person is very successful in their line of work. Well, his Karakamsha Lagna is Virgo. The 10th from there has Mercury in its own sign, getting Rashi Drishti from Jupiter. Mercury is actually the MK. And what was he before he got a politician? He was a real estate mogul, right? And so his chart is a perfect illustration of one of the sutras given in the chapter on the effects of planets from Karakamsha Lagna. So this will be the topic of my second presentation that I'm excited about going because I just love talking about Jaimini and the Jaimini system.
Hey, K.N. Rao asked me also to teach Gemini, and I did that for a couple of semesters, and I enjoyed it immensely. But after that, I lost interest in it, and now I'm picking it up back for the last 2-3 years. So,
oh, really? Really? So you've come back to it?
No, but I'm not going to leave Parashari. Parashari is still my first love.
Okay, all right. Well, believe me, I always use them together, but I would say that Jaimini is what I really love.
Oh, yeah. What is your relationship with Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan now?
Well, when I left corporate life, this would have been in October 2012, and then I was much free. I had much more time. I could do what I wanted to do. So then I started being invited to speak. They have an international conference each year. And so I was invited to present at that conference. And I was invited to start having my articles published in their journal, the Journal of Astrology. And so that went on for a period of years. Actually, I ended up being able to teach in Russia. K.N. Rao had been going to Russia, for years and years. So when one of the Russian students saw me present at the international conference, they invited me along with K.N. Rao to go to Russia. When it came down just the day before he was to leave, his health didn't permit him to go. So it was myself and one of his faculty members, who I'm sure you know, Deepak Basaria. We ended up going to Russia. Basaria ji really liked to consult. I liked to teach. So I ended up teaching. He ended up doing all the consulting. And at that point is when the Russian students then started inviting me back. And I probably have more Russian students than I have students in the US. It's kind of an interesting, sort of development that I would have never anticipated. But the Russian students are very, very enthusiastic about Jyotish. And I love teaching them.
Yeah, I know that. We have been teaching quite a few batches of the Russian and the Ukrainian students. I and Dr. Charak for a long time. And not only they're enthusiastic, they're pretty sharp, most of them.
Oh, some of them are brilliant.
Yeah.
Quite brilliant.
What would be your advice for the young students who intend to make astrology their profession?
I would advise them not to make it their profession.
Why, if they follow your example, you're a successful one.
Well,
So,
no, you have to understand that for most of my adult life, I was never a professional astrologer. It was always just something that was a passion and interest of mine. And I earned my living in other ways. It's only been since I retired from corporate life that I've devoted myself full time to Jyotish. And there's a difference between what I would call an academic Jyotish, someone who researches, or someone who teaches, someone who authors versus practitioner. I'm sort of making a joke, but my joke today is that whenever I go to teach, it seems like everybody and their brother is becoming an astrologer, and the problem is that very few people go through a systematic training and then do enough practice, get enough experience where they become competent Jyotishis. And a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, as you know. My advice would be is to learn the subject systematically from the ground up. What I see as being a problem, especially with all the YouTube presentations, students are hearing about these very advanced, very esoteric, very non-mainstream sort of things. Before they even, I use the analogy, they try to live in a house before they built the foundation. They're trying to live in the upper stories of the house, and it doesn't work. Another analogy I use, they're trying to read Shakespeare and they haven't learned the alphabet yet, right? So, learn in a systematic step-by-step from the ground floor up, from a competent teacher who teaches in that way, and then you start, absorbing the classics. And then what I said previously, just start working on charts. Then Jyotish will teach you Jyotish. So that's my advice. I had started to kind of jump into all these sort of things when I first became a student. Then I realized I was not benefiting from that. I decided to kind of go back and just, again, step by step, build a foundation that then becomes the basis for going into the more, advanced techniques and so on. I usually encourage people to learn the Parashari system well before they learn Jaimini. You can learn them simultaneously. I did, but I'd had a background in astrology for 20 years. But when someone wants to study with me, I usually insist that they become quite proficient in the Parashari system before they can study Jaimini. That's just my point of view.
I agree with you. I would advise the same. Any new books that you may be bringing up in the next 6 months or 1 year?
Yes, I'm always writing books now, usually more than one simultaneously.
Simultaneously.
I wrote I did a course on actually I wanted to, my background is counseling psychology. For a period of time, I worked as a psychotherapist. I still had to study psychopathology. So I thought I was in a good position to write what I would consider to be a landmark book, because I haven't seen anything on this topic, a separate book, The Astrology of Mental and Emotional Illness. And I taught a 9-week course to that, both to a group of Russians and then also other students online. And whenever I teach a course, I always hand out a fully articulated written lesson each week of an 8-week course. And then I end up with a book. So I've written that material, and now I'm shaping it up in a book. Right now, I'm teaching a class on all the conditional nakshatra-based dashas, like Dvi Saptatami Samadasha, Chaturashiti Samadasha, all those 9 conditional nakshatra-based dashas that are given in Parashara Hora. I'm now writing a book on that. And I'm coming out with a book on the effects of planets from Karakamsha Lagna. That's been included in some of the Jaimini courses I've taught, but I've never come out with a separate book on that with an original translation and commentary on those sutras in the second pada of the first chapter of the Jaimini Sutras. Of course, I always look to try to illustrate them with examples of the charts of famous personalities or of case studies where I made predictions based on these principles. So those are the 3 books that I currently have in progress. Not sure when they'll come out, when God wills it, I guess. But those are the ones I'm working on.
Okay. How would you motivate a young student who hates Jaimini to study Jaimini?
Yeah, well,
because he's been so much in Parashari and he feels comfortable with Parashari that he doesn't like Jaimini, because Jaimini in any case is fraught with too many controversies.
No, it's a good question. It's a good question. The way I would motivate them is I would take their own chart and I would take their life events and I would show them how those life events are coming out in the Jiminy system, and sometimes the way in which they come out again with an elegant simplicity. Just before this conversation, Vinay, I was teaching an advanced course in Jiminy to an advanced set of students. And I was showing them a chart of the famous tennis player, Steffi Graf, famous women's tennis player.
Yes.
She married in her Pisces period. If you look in Virgo, there's Jupiter as the dark arca. Simple. So by showing them these things, my experience is when I show these things to students, they're interested in learning Jiminy.
Good. Of course, the entire study of astrology works on this basis. Those who don't believe in it, tell them a few things and they become interested. That happens true. Over and over again.
Yes, it does. These are good questions.
I'm a bit confused about a couple of things about Karakansha. I don't know if it would be a bit too technical at this stage to talk about them, because you have yet to teach Karakansha. Because when we read the Gemini Sutrams for Karakansha, they would say that if Jupiter or Mercury are in the second, or in the third, or in the fourth, or even the fifth, or in the ninth, this is the result. So this seems to me stretching of a point to a limit where it doesn't work anymore. So if it is in the second, so if that is the sutra, fine, I accept it. If it is in the fifth and then you give a sutra, I understand and then it's fine. But so many variations of that, how can that possibly be working in actual life?
Well, then I would have to look at the specific sutras that you're talking about. One of the big issues with Jiminy, and I'm sorry if this gets a little technical, is the word tatra in Sanskrit. Tatra means therein, placed therein. That's what it means literally. But, in the Jiminy Sutras, as you well know, the bhava, the house, is indicated by taking a Sanskrit word and turning it into a number, right? And I won't go into the technicality of how that happens. Tatra means in the second from. So there are Jiminy Sutras that some scholars say, no, Tatra means the planet's placed here. And some say, no, it means it's placed second from there, right? So there are these controversies. And again, I address these in my book, The Essentials of Jiminy. And again, what I'm interested in is what works. Now, you're right. If you're saying that the same result can happen from 2 planets here, 2 planets there, 2 planets there, it doesn't become something you can utilize. It doesn't become something valid.
And then over and above that, they would also say that this would work from the Karakansha Lagna in the Rashi chart.
Well,
not in Navamsha chart. I mean, Navamsha chart, of course, is a separate entity. But it would work if you consider that sign as the Lagna where the Karakansha is.
No.
So the same formula work E1 and D1.
It can. Again, if you do Jiminy in the style of K.N. Rao, you would use Karakamsha as this Lagna, call it Karakamsha in the birth log, but use the same Lagna. And what you're always looking for is confluence, right? You're looking whether, indications agree. Let me take an example. There are combinations for authorship given in this chapter. Basically, what it says, if the natural benefics, particularly the moon and Jupiter, are influencing either the Karakamsha Lagna or the fifth from there, then a person can be someone who's an author. How successful an author they are depends upon additional factors, particularly if it's the moon and Jupiter involved. This can give the greatest success as an author. Well, I wrote a book called Literary Love Affair, where I took the charts of all these famous authors, right? All these famous authors. And I applied those combinations. I applied them. And you'll see that in situations where they apply both in the birth chart and in the Vamsha is where you have a person who was probably the most successful and famous author. So again, this idea of confluence, right?
Then there's a sutra that says that it would work even from the birth lagna.
Well, this is the other thing.
The Karakansha and Atmakaraka are out of it. even that becomes a formula.
Well, but what you have to understand is what I came to realize is these combinations that are given from Karakamsha Lagna will apply from other Lagnas as well. In other words, they'll apply from, they don't apply just exclusively from Karakamsha Lagna. They can be applied really virtually to any Lagna, and you can see them working. You can even apply them from Dasha Lagna, meaning that,
Yeah,
you know,
that
if you
makes
take,
sense, of course.
yeah, but you see, there's the idea of some period showing a potential. Whether that potential will become actual, I would never make that judgment just based on the one system, be it Jaimini or Parashari. What I need to have them do is to both the systems be showing the same trend at the same time. This is what, as you know, K. and Rao referred to as the composite technique. And this is what I teach and what has, I believe, given me my predictive success. I will use any, not just two dashas, not just Vimshotri or Chara, but I might be using 2 or 3 or 4 dashas to try to zero in on a specific event like marriage or childbirth. There are some dashas that are conditional, both in the Parashari system and the Jaimini system, that when they apply, in some respects, there's the hint in the Shastra that they should take precedence, right? So when, for example, the 7th Lord is in the 1st or the 1st Lord is in the 7th, then this dasha, which only applies about 9% of horoscopes, Dwi Saptatami Samadasha applies. I recently used that to make a prediction, but I made that prediction because the same trend that I was seeing in that dasha was also showing in Chara, was also showing in Vimshotri. Might have been in a different way, but they were all pointing in the same direction, right? This had to do with childbirth. So, you know, it's when you get that agreement between systems that it gives you the feeling that you're seeing something that is actual. If I don't see that, it's more of a question to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
I'm
Can
sure you
we
do the
take some
same.
questions now?
Sure.
Scott is asking everyone, what impact do you think retrograde Mercury and Saturn have had on your teaching and writing or astrological career? Anything specific?
Well, you know, retrograde planets are probably the most difficult thing. The behavior of retrograde planets is probably the most unpredictable and difficult thing to sort of parse out. You know, there are some Jyotishis that would teach because in Chastabala, in motional strength, in Chadbala, a full additional rupal comes about when a planet is retrograde. So you'd had some people take the position that it actually can be a source of strength. K. and Rao, as you're probably aware, talked about how they can act unpredictably, sometimes giving quite the reverse of what they pretend. They don't protect, retrograde benefics don't protect in medical astrology, as Dr. Charak teaches. I found that principle to be quite true. As to my own chart, what a retrograde Mercury, retrograde Saturn has meant, I'm quite a backward individual. I don't know, I'm just joking. Sometimes,
We've been seeing how backward you are during the last 1 hour.
Right. Exactly. And retrograde Mercury, I sometimes, when I write, I sometimes get the sentence structure, you know, I have to have somebody help me edit it because I sometimes get the sentence structure in would not be the right order. That might be a function of my sort of retrograde Mercury. Retrograde Saturn, you know, as the 6th Lord in the 1st, it's going to cause some health problems in my Saturn period. It has a retrograde malefic as a 6th Lord in the 1st. Fortunately, there's some protection with the aspect of Jupiter from the 7th. It's a complex sort of thing. I don't have an easy and ready answer for that, quite frankly, and I acknowledge that.
Okay, there's another question here. Michael Sugarman writes, if this conversation went another 6 hours, I would listen to every minute. But before that, I would go to sleep. The last part is, I have added.
That sounds like Michael.
Yeah, there were quite a few things on my chat. Where have they gone? Just a moment. Saurabh or Meenakshi, can you look at some of the other questions?
Yes, Vinayji, I will look into the questions.
Yeah, I've got this question now. It is, what changes will Rahu Dasha bring to the native? Rahu Mahadasha and Shani Antardasha, the dreaded combination.
Well, it's funny that this person should ask. If you send me their email, I'll send them. I wrote an article called Iron and Steel. That was the title. And it was about Rahu Saturn and Saturn Rahu periods. And they are ones to pay attention to. But I showed instances where in the context of a particular chart, they gave, really great results. And then they have a bad reputation for a reason, because I showed many examples of people running that period and sub-period where it gave extremely unfavorable results. Now, we have this principle, as you know, that natural malefics collecting in the Trishadais 3, 6, and 11 can give an unusual type of Raja Yoga, right? And I was just actually this morning, I was showing the horoscope of this movie star Mel Gibson, who is Gemini Lagna, has a collection of Rahu, Saturn, and Mars in his 6th house. They also fall 3rd from the moon. He became a big international movie star in his Rahu period. Right? And so, and I in that article, Iron and Steel, I give many examples. And then, we have this very interesting verse in Parashara Hora in the chapter on Raja Yoga, where it says, natural malefics collecting in the Trishadai, while all the benefics are in Kendras, also produce a Raja Yoga. And I have shown examples of that, and I actually predicted on that basis before where it came out accurately. So like anything, what any period and sub-period is going to bring depends upon the context of those planets in the chart, not just the Rashi, but also key divisional charts. So you can't make, you might say, big generalizations. You'll go wrong. That said, obviously, Saturn and Rahu are two also unqualified Marcas, and I can show you any number, I could show you any number of examples where that period and sub-period proved very bad for the person in terms of the bodily suffering, and sometimes they died in that period, right? Irrespective of them becoming primary Marcas by any other ways. So again, it's always, you can never make these, Ken Rao used to say push button predictions based on just these gross, these big generalizations. It's always an evaluation of those two grahas in the chart in terms of what they're going to bring as far as their period and sub-period.
Yeah, there's another question here. Marc, what is your favorite book written by you and one written by K.N. Rao?
My favorite book of K.N. Rao is easy. It's Yogi's Destiny and the Wheel of Time. I just love that.
Which we had printed.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
And my second favorite book is Predicting with Jaimini's Charadasha, which for 20 years in a row, once a year, I read that book, and I came to understand more and more what it was saying. So my two favorite books of his are Yogi's Destiny and Wheel of Time, because it's all about the astrology of spirituality and his experiences of meeting great saints and sages in his life. Loved that book. And then as far as just something I learned so much from, it was the Jaimini Charadasha. My favorite book of my own, which also happens to be my bestseller, is my book, The Essentials of Jaimini. Essentials of Jaimini.
There is another book by K.N. Rao which I really admire, and that is the Nehru Dynasty.
Yes.
It all came much before Bharati Vidya Bhavan started.
Yes.
And all that. It's one of the masterpieces by a master, and it would show another writer how to write a book, how to bring out the various things. And I haven't seen any other author who brings that kind of technical brilliance to the analysis of a chart. Because most other people just write just a few things which they want to illustrate and leave the rest. But here, since he was doing a whole biographical sketch, he's gone to the depths of the chart in so many different ways that is quite illustrative and inspiring.
You know, I couldn't agree more. And it's from that book that I got the hint that when from a particular Dasha Lagna in Gemini, two planets exchange, the nature of the exchange can be quite significant. He makes a little hint about this because she first, Indira Gandhi first became prime minister in her Scorpio major period. You probably know in her chart, Mars and the Sun exchange. The Sun's in Scorpio, Mars is in Leo. So for using Scorpio as a Dasha Lagna, that now exchange becomes 110. And he refers to this.
Yes.
It's easy to miss it if you don't understand what's being said, but that really made an impression on me. And in my articles I wrote an article about that, showing all these examples of how when an exchange becomes very favorable from a particular Dasha Lagna, this is something to pay attention to.
I read another formula, not in Gemini, but normal, that if there is an exchange between the 6th Lord and the 7th Lord, which can spoil your marriage, but it can be great for your profession, because this exchange between the 6th and the 7th Lord is actually the exchange between the 9th and the 10th Lords from the 10th house.
The 10th house, yes.
So that comes out brilliantly, very often.
Yes, very good. Love that.
There is another question here. Nirukta Jyotish, to the point practical astrology. Marc, as you have Saturn in Virgo, that's why your topics are in systematic order.
That's correct. That's why I advocate a very systematic step-by-step approach, because that's just an expression of me and my, you might say, psychological makeup. And so that's true. That's not a question. They're just making an observation, or they're asking me if I think that's why.
In fact, there are a couple of similarities between your chart and mine.
Is that right?
My Saturn is also in the Lagna, and in Virgo, I have my moon.
Uh-huh. Which Lagna? What's your birth Lagna?
Leo.
Okay, I see. Very good.
So the 6th Lord in the Lagna.
Yes, we share that.
Yeah. Any other questions here? Pinakshi?
Yes, Vinayji, there is a question. It looks like, would you please leave the book names here? She is asking, so I can do that for her.
Okay.
I think Nilima ji is asking a question. Would it depend on which Rashi and Nakshatra in Rahu is placed in for a Rahu Dasha?
Of course. Nilima ji doesn't need to ask such a question, because the answer is so obviously yes. And as Marc has very clearly said, that every such question actually has to be referred to the actual chart. And no...
Nilima, what are you asking? Can I ask you directly? What are you asking?
Well, what I was thinking is when people were mentioning about this Rahu-Saturn period, so if Rahu is placed in a benefic Rashi and a benefic Nakshatra, that period may not be as challenging as placed in a malefic Rashi and a malefic Nakshatra.
Well, in general, as Vinay well knows, when the Rahu and Ketu are in the signs of benefics, aspected by benefics, and without malefic influence, they can actually give very, very benign, very, very favorable results. In my writing, I've showed innumerable examples of this sort of thing. So, but it just again gets back to the individual disposition of Rahu. What house is it in? What sign is it in? What are the associations with it? In order to judge the results, particularly being a Chaya Graha, it's going to give the results of what it's associated with.
Nilima, in fact, you're referring only to the benefic Rashi alone.
That's right.
In fact, there is much more to it. For example, what nakshatras Rahu and Ketu are in, and Shani is in. Then it would also be definitely involving what is happening in the Navansha of Rahu. And then also, of course, Dashmansha, because many times the results are in the field of your career rather than in your personal life. So things of that kind.
What
This is
about if
why-
Rahu and Saturn are placed 5-9 from each other, or 2-12, or 6-8 from each other?
Well, 6-8 is, of course, not so good, but depending on so many other things. But 5-9 could also be a problematic thing,
That's what I thought. Yeah.
but much less than 6-8.
Indira Gandhi, Nilima, Indira Gandhi's Saturn's in the first house, Rahu's in the sixth. They're 6-8
Yeah.
from each other. Saturn's a primary Marika, and she was assassinated in Saturn Rahu.
Saturn Rahu, that's fine.
But again, it just has to be. You can look at those dispositions from each other. I think I've shown you. Well, in Indira Gandhi, when she ran Rahu Saturn in Saptamsha, not in the birth chart, in Saptamsha, Saturn falls fifth from Rahu. And I've seen over and over again where a sub-period lord falls fifth in D7 from a major period lord. This period and sub-period gives a child. It applies to your chart, Nilima,
It does. It does.
right?
Yes.
So again, you always have to see it in the context.
There is a
of-
question here by Umesh. And so out of the target of 100,000 charts in 10 years, where are you now?
Well, I didn't say it was 100,000.
You said 10,000.
No, I said, he said thousands of charts. He said thousands of charts. And over a 10-year period, I didn't count, but I'm sure I looked at, at least 1,000 charts. Where am I now? I have no idea. I've been doing Jyotish full time since 2013. And, with all the writing that I've done, I would say many thousands. And I learned something from every one of them. Or it reinforces something that I already know. Or I learned something new. That's what I mean by working on charts. Jyotish will teach you Jyotish.
There's another interesting question by Umesh. He says, is Rahu in Cancer considered a benefic? This is puzzling since Rahu and Moon are considered enemies. And it is true that Rahu in Cancer is considered to be pretty good, especially for politicians.
Think of the chart
Especially
of
for
Mahatma Gandhi.
politicians.
Think of the chart for Mahatma Gandhi. He has Libra Lagna, he has Rahu in the
Yeah.
10th house in Cancer.
Rahu with
the
Moon.
Right. Was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? It's both. It's never just one thing, right? Now,
Yeah.
there are ways in which Rahu and Ketu become Raja Yoga Karakas, right? If just Rahu in Cancer, I would have to say a lot, it's going to depend upon what happens to the moon, its dispositor, since Rahu to a large degree will always give the results of its dispositor.
In Mahatma
So-
Gandhi's case, Moon itself is the dispositor of Rahu.
Correct.
And they're together.
So again, this is why I call this cookbook astrology, and I'm very much against it. You'll see this: Rahu in the 10th house means this. Rahu in Cancer means this. It's just
But the classics
never-
are full of such sutras.
yes, but they're only guidelines.
Yes.
They're only guidelines. You can't take,
Yes.
if you try to interpret dogmatically, literally like that, you'll go completely wrong. Take a hint.
Oh, well, somebody has corrected me. I think that question was from Ajit and not from Umesh.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Well,
Vinayji,
Ah,
there is one of the student of the Marc has told 2 lines. Do you want me to speak, run that video?
yeah, you may.
Okay, so if that's the case, I will quickly start this video.
Oh, Mr. Rohit. Mr.
I
Rohit.
am a student of
So can you hear?
And
Yes.
I wanted to say a few things about Marc, his teaching, his approach to Jyotish. So I have been really blessed and have had the good fortune of learning Jyotish from Marc for a couple of years now. And it's been a real blessing in my life to have learned Jyotish from Marc in a way that I think is very correct, scientific, and something that can be applied to each and every chart. Marc goes about his teaching in a very, very scientific way. He tells you how to break down a chart, what to look for, and what to soak in, and how to basically infer from a chart. And it's a very systematic, scientific approach, which is the hallmark of his teaching. And like I said, we've all been very blessed to have learned from him. And not only his teaching, even his teaching, which have been captured in books and his video sessions and everything. I'd really encourage everybody to go and take a look at the books that he's written. The books on yogas and the books on Laghu Parashri are absolute gems. I mean, for somebody learning Jyotish and getting to a point where they need to take the leap from a beginner to an advanced student, those books are absolute must. And he has contributed immensely to this treasure trove, so to speak, of Jyotish. And it's a great thing that somebody who's starting out in Jyotish can tap into his books and his videos and everything and learn the subject in the right manner. So with that, I would just, like to say that, if anybody gets a chance to learn Jyotish or is looking to learn Jyotish going forward, Marc Boney is definitely my #1 recommendation for them. I hope you all stay healthy, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Vinayji.
Namaste, everybody. My name is Rohit.
Well, that sounds like a paid endorsement. But,
Now the question
but I didn't even know he was doing that.
Oh, then why did you pay him? Marc, thank you very much. It was wonderful talking to you.
I agree.
Yeah, and we have so many similarities in our lives, and of course, the cause of astrology is being served by both of us. So, Meenakshi, over to you.
It was wonderful to reconnect with you, Vinay, and I hope sometime we're both at the Ashby Vidya together, and then we could spend some time together.
Or else in Delhi.
Or in Delhi.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lovely. So thank you for the wonderful interview. We had a quite successful event on the YouTube. There are many people watching us, and especially Sunil, John, Michael Sugarman. We're also giving the comment from the YouTube. So thanks for all of this. With that, we will really will not take a lot of time of people. It's still 1:30. We had scheduled the time, so we'll go more towards closing the session. So I will close the session with the closing mantra of Purnamida. Om Purnamida Purnamidam Purnamudakshate Purnascha Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Thank you, Marc. Thank you, Vinayji.
Namaste, everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Marc.
Thank you.
You also. Bye-bye.
Thank you.